Take two, and welcome to Critical Weight Theory. So, if you spent any time around a logging camp in the upper Midwest about 100 years ago, you'd hear stories told late at night when the fire was low and the woods felt very close. Stories about men bigger than trees, about winters that lasted forever, and about animals you'd never see anywhere else, and frankly, that you would never actually see in reality. Today I'm talking about one of those animals, a creature that never existed, but somehow still feels real if you've spent time in the North Woods, and it would probably help if you were drunk off your ass. So, this is the story of the Axehandle Hound. So, the world it came from, what about that? The Axehandle Hound comes out of the same tradition as Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox, the larger than life world of lumber camps in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the wider North Woods. Michigan, maybe? Sure, but few articles I read on mythical creatures include my state of Michigan, so I guess we're just not good enough for most cryptids and whatnot. Whatever. I know there are a few cryptids from Michigan that get some recognition, but usually we're not at the forefront of these stories. These logging camps were isolated, cold, dangerous, and boring in long stretches. Men worked brutal hours, then gathered at night with little to do but eat, rest, drink, and probably have secret sexual encounters because far more people were closeted back then. And of course, they would sometimes talk and tell stories. And out of that setting came what folklorists later called fearsome critters, completely made up animals invented for fun, for storytelling, and often for messing with new hires. They weren't meant to fool people forever, of course, just long enough to get a laugh. And I think very few people were gullible enough to fall for a creature as silly as this, but you know what? Some people probably did believe this story because if there's one thing I've learned in the last decade or so, is that there are some real gullible people out there who will pretty much believe anything. So I've actually got an example that's similar, not about the axe handle hound, but there were some kids I knew back in my elementary school days who hailed from Arizona originally. So I told them about these things called snow snakes. And I warned them that, you got to be careful going into these snow banks and just walking around in the snow because one of those snow snakes, they're out there, they might get you, and I actually tricked them. Now, snow snakes are actually a little bit more plausible sounding than the axe handle hound, but I have to say that this anecdote is actually solid proof that some people can be fooled into believing in creatures that you just make up on the spot. And let's get into what the axe handle hound is. What exactly is an axe handle hound? Well, picture a dog. Now stretch its body long and thin, like the handle of an axe. Give it short, stubby legs so it stays low to the ground, and instead of a normal head, give it the shape of an axe blade. Half animal, half tool, kind of quirky and kind of cute, but also seemingly dangerous. You probably wouldn't want to encounter something like this unless you were ready for it, I suppose. Fortunately, as I've said, no such creature actually exists, and it's a fun little story, really. That's where the name comes from. It's basically a description of what the creature is. An axe handle hound. It looks like what it eats too. That's another quirky thing about this story. Part of its behavior and habits, according to the stories, axe handle hounds are nocturnal. They come out at night, slipping silently through logging camps while the lumberjacks sleep. Their food or at least their favorite food isn't meat, it's wooden tool handles, axes, these things called peavies or pevies, I don't know how this pronouncing exactly. Anything with a good solid grip left leaning against a stump or a bunkhouse wall. So if you leave your tools out overnight, by morning the handle might be gone, chewed clean through by that devious little critter known as the Axehandle Hound. And can't you just imagine some bearded cigar chewing lumberjack in the morning surveying the scene of the crime? All those missing mixing missing axe handles, and then removing the cigar from his mouth to say, "Oh my god, I thought it was just a story. Turns out that son of a bitch is real. Those axe handle hound deviants are out there. Stay on guard. Protect your axes." Well, it turns out that some versions of the tale say that they'll eat several axe handles in a single night. Others claim they're picky. They supposedly dislike certain types of wood, like red oak, and will leave those untouched. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a nuanced story. Makes the creature sound a little bit more real. Boy, I almost said sound instead of sound. I just can't talk, man. But anyway, naturally, this made for a perfect explanation when a tool broke or went missing, and somebody didn't want to fess up to it or something like that. It wasn't my fault, a logger could say. Must have been the axe handle hound who had a case of the midnight munchies. So it was good for campfire storytelling. I don't know if they had marshmallows back then, but maybe they did. I think marshmallows are one of those things that's actually older than a person might think, so maybe they had them. But anyway, those stories were especially useful with newcomers. It helps, you know, create a fun atmosphere. Maybe puts people a little bit more at ease. A greenhorn arrives at camp, doesn't know the routines yet, leaves his axe outside overnight. In the morning, someone notices the damage and shakes their head. Didn't anyone you warn you about the axe handle hounds? So I guess maybe it could also be an excuse for mischief, like if a person wanted to break an axe or something like that, and they could just make it seem like a prank that was committed by the axe handle hound instead. And it's actually something that has a lot of potential. I don't know if the axe handle hound is really caught on as a pop culture thing, but I did find numerous images of the creature, so it's apparently not something that's so obscure that practically no one has ever heard of the thing. And the story has potential to grow. How they hunt, what sounds they make, how you might trap one if you're brave or foolish enough to try. Maybe there could be a horror movie about the axe handle hound or a horror short. They could depict them as maybe a little bit more dangerous than the legend would have you think at first. And it could all be, a sustained part of camp culture, a way to pass the time, build camaraderie, and gently haze the uninitiated. So this is more about folklore and not some actual belief. It's important to say this plainly. Practically no one truly believed that axe handle hounds were real animals. In fact, these weren't even ghost stories meant to scare people, they were jokes, tall tales, shared myths that belonged to the camp first and foremost. They sit alongside other fearsome critters like the hodag or the jackalope, not animals of nature, just creatures of the imagination. And as naturalist and writer Sigurd F. Olsen once said, only when one is aware and still can things be seen and heard. In the quiet of the woods, with the fire dying down and the night closing in, imagination does a lot of the work. So the axe handle hound never roamed the forests of Wisconsin or Minnesota or anywhere else, but the story of it did. And it's a fun story indeed. It's a fun creature to imagine as one to look out for. And in a way that matters just as much. These tales tell us about how people lived, worked, joked, and survived in some relatively harsh places. They remind us that folklore isn't just about believing strange things, it's about sharing a moment, a laugh, and a sense of belonging. So if you ever find yourself in the North Woods and some old timer mentions missing axe handles, listen closely. You might just be hearing the echoes of an axe handle hound. Ooh, it's out there. It's going to get you.